to the always controversial direction on the page so that you can see how it's done by other screenwriters and determine if you wanted to include it in your screenplays or not. And it doesn't matter that he is a writer-director. Some of the writer-directors include more direction on the page because they want to be very clear about their vision. Some include none at all because they want this to be a literary document and they have other documents that they're going to use with the DP to determine how they're going to get this thing shot. So it really doesn't matter. But here in this particular screenplay, it's a lot. The classic we are, we see, we follow 142 times in this screenplay. We're put in the position of the camera so that we can take in and visualize the scene. There are some interesting framing and camera directions on the page. 360 spinning is used 11 times. Here's an example of it. On page 14, it says the team goes in a big circle to warm up. The camera spins in a 360 from inside the circle, following Tyler. Soon the team breaks up into partners to warm up, and the camera switches to spin around Tyler in a 360. So this is how he uses it on the page, and this is what it looks like in the film. Of course, that's a different scene than what we just read, but it gives you a taste of what it looks like when he's describing this 360 spin around. The word camera is used 71 times in this screenplay where he's giving specific directions about what camera or how to use the camera. On this page alone here, there are 7s. We've got 4 pushes and a shoot through and 2 pans. Throughout the screenplay, we have tilts, pushes, pans, wides, aerials. He calls for anamorphic lenses in the screenplay, which is these super wide lenses that give you this beautiful depth of field. They use the Panavision T series in this film. This is how they compress the space and make a small space seem bigger, like inside a car or inside a bedroom. This is how they have such detailed shots of the characters' faces, but extreme depth of field behind them. Also, these lenses allow you to play around a little bit and get some of these visual flares and dreamy-like visuals which do show up in the film. He calls for slow motion shots 10 times in the screenplay. Here's a good example on page 48 where it says Tyler walks through the party with strobe lights hitting everything in slow motion. The camera pans through the dance floor with kids dancing and sweating in slow motion to find Emily sitting on a couch at the back of the living room. He calls for 48 frames per second 5 times in the screenplay. Normally it's 24 frames per second. That's the classic cinematic look. Whenever you switch up like that, it can be jarring and create some emotion for the viewer, and that's what he's going for here. Good example on page 5. It says we are close up in 48 frames per second on a hand moving through the wind, hair blowing, sunlight hitting beautiful eyes, etc. Alexis turns to see Tyler watching her. They both smile. He gets very serious about aspect ratio and talks about that quite a bit in the screenplay, and it shows up in the film. Several times he goes to the 2.4 to 1 ratio, which is extremely wide. Normally it's at the 1.85 to 1, which is the standard format, that 16 by 9 that you're used to seeing. By doing this throughout the screenplay, the ratio gets smaller and smaller and smaller as tragedy is getting closer and closer and closer. And then at the end of the first act, it's basically a square. And you can actually notice it. I think as it's getting smaller, you probably don't notice it. But once it's a square, it's very noticeable. And that's all here in the screenplay where it calls for all of this. And then as we get into the second act and we have to deal with this grief and tragedy and get through it, it starts to expand until at the end of the screenplay and at the end of the film, it's back to the full standard. He even mentions the black bars directly on the page. Here's a note on page 47 where it says the black bars at the top and bottom of the screen, making sure we know what he's talking about, have finished closing in, and we are now in the 3 to 1 aspect ratio. And he calls for 2 scripted oneers, those ambitious shots where you follow people around and get pieces of conversation. One of them's here on 47, and it says, note, this will be a 1 unbroken take from the time Tyler gets out of his truck until now. As the camera pushes down the hallway, the black bars at the top and bottom of the screen begin to close in. So again, he's prompting us with the black bars, but he's also saying all these shots for the rest of this page, one shot, everybody better be in their positions.